protocol that we're building. Right? I'm Tiago Sada, head of product at Worldcoin, do a bunch of random stuff here. And so just as a reminder here at the Hack Money hackathon, we have 16K up for grabs for people that build on this proof of concept SDK. So take a look at that. But before getting directly into the protocol itself, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about the project Worldcoin, how we got to where we're at today, and why we even built this SDK. All right. So Worldcoin started about 2 years ago with a very simple premise. Like, crypto is awesome, but there's a few problems, mainly two of them. Very few people have actually used crypto. And the second one is that all of the value that's being unlocked by crypto or created by cryptocurrencies or all of these protocols is being hoarded by early adopters like myself or people with disposable income that just get to accumulate all this value. And we think that sucks, right? And so we asked a very simple question. What would have happened if Bitcoin had started by giving 1 Bitcoin to every person that was alive at that time, right? And so this, as simple as it sounds, we think it could have accomplished a couple of things, right? It could have, first of all, educated a lot of people about cryptocurrencies around the world. Secondly, it would have meant that probably a significant amount of those people would be using blockchain-based products today. And then most importantly, it would have spread out the value that Bitcoin has generated, right, to the world. And so obviously it was a little bit late to do this for crypto and for Bitcoin, sorry. But we said, what the heck, let's just try it ourselves. And so we created a token called Worldcoin. And we started working on this about 2 years ago. And so Worldcoin is very simple. There's 10 billion tokens. Every person can get some tokens for free simply for being humans until the tokens run out, right? And so a small percentage of the tokens are meant to fund the project, but the vast majority of the tokens are giving away to the world for free as an initial distribution. And so this all sounded great, but we ran into one problem, right? How do we make sure each person only claims their tokens only one time, right? When you're giving away free money, I mean, it's obvious that people will want to double dip. And this seemed like a very innocent problem at first, but actually we ended up realizing this was super hard. And there's the academic term for this, sybil attacks. It's basically everything from Twitter bots to random likes on YouTube, to attacks on airdrops. It's a problem that is really, really difficult to solve. How do you make sure that a person only does something one time, right? And so as we started looking into how to solve this, there were a couple of issues that came up with different solutions, right? First of all, we wanted whatever we did to be super private, right? The second thing is, if we wanted to do a global airdrop, we need to make sure it was inclusive. It needed to work in every country around the world. And lastly, it needed to be scalable, right? Specifically for what we're trying to do is we're trying to give Worldcoin to as many people as possible, which means that it needs to be realistic and there needs to be a path for reaching hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. And so we started looking at a bunch of ways how to solve this, right? We started by saying, okay, let's just make people verify their emails or their phone numbers like social apps do. Turns out that's pretty easy to get around. Then we said, okay, let's verify official IDs, right? Like passports. But the problem with that was, first of all, turns out most people in the world, or many people in the world, don't have an ID. And many of the ones that do are in countries where there's no SDKs or APIs to actually verify them remotely, right? And even if that was possible, it turns out like this is super costly. And more importantly, it's super privacy invasive, right? We did not want to collect all of this sensitive information from basically everyone on Earth. This would be a liability for us or for any partners that we shared it with. Then we run into this other approach called Web of Trust, which is basically the idea that users can endorse each other, right? And so if you trust a certain amount of users, they can verify other people as real people. And so we thought this was really interesting. But the problem is you need an initial set of users that you can trust. And when you're trying to verify the entire world with Web of Trust, you need a really large initial set of users that's evenly spread across the world. And so this is actually how we eventually plan to scale Worldcoin. But for now, between 1 and a billion people, we had to find a different path, which led us to biometrics, right? Like when we took a step back and we said, okay, what really makes people different between each other? It's their biometrics, right? And so we started looking into, okay, what can we do here? I won't run through every single option that we run into, but basically the challenge with biometrics is you need to have enough data to make sure that you can distinguish between 1 in 10 billion people. And it needs to be very difficult to cheat, right? So for example, something like a fingerprint, it does not have enough data to distinguish 1 in a billion people. It works for our phones because on our phone, you're only doing a one-to-one comparison, right? You're comparing the finger that it's seeing to a previous recording of your finger, right? So if it matches, it lets you in. With Worldcoin, we actually had the opposite problem, right? We had to look at your fingerprint and compare it against every other fingerprint that we've seen in the past to make sure that you hadn't signed up before. And that's super, super difficult. Additionally, it's really easy to just make a small cut on your finger and now you're a new person, right? And so you run into similar things when you say, you look at people's faces or even at palms and the veins on their palms. DNA is just super creepy, so we did not want to do that. And eventually we realized that, like many other systems in the world, that the iris has these two properties, right? There's enough data, it's called enough entropy there to distinguish between a large set of people. And it's also very difficult to change, right? Even twins, for example, have different irises. And so once we had that, we said, okay, let's try to build this on a phone, right? But it turns out that phones, their sensors are just not powerful enough to distinguish between enough people, right? Something like an iPhone can distinguish between 1 in 10 million people, not 1 in 10 billion people. Same thing with off-the-shelf hardware, right? When you look at what people do, for example, in customs or clear, they're able to buy software off the shelf because they're doing a one-to-one comparison, right? You basically go get registered, and then the next time you go to the airport, they're comparing those biometrics to your previous recording. And so we didn't want to do that, right? And so eventually we ended up realizing that we had to do custom hardware. And this is something that we tried really, really hard to avoid. But eventually we just said, okay, if we want to solve this problem, we're going to have to build our own hardware. And so we got into 2 years of really hard R&D. And so it took about 5 generations and a long time of prototypes. And eventually we got this little beauty, which you might have seen on Twitter at some point. This device is called the Orb. It's a ball of about this size. And it has 3 jobs, right? The first job of the Orb is to make sure that you're a real person, right? It looks at your face and it checks that, that you're alive, that you actually have facial features, that you're not wearing prosthetics, a bunch of things like this, right? Basically to establish trust. This is one of those things that's not very obvious, but none of the commercially available sensors would have had, right? The second thing that it does is that it looks at your iris and it generates a code from your iris. And then the last thing that it does is on device, it will compute a hash of that iris. It can compare it for uniqueness. And then if it's unique, it signs it and it posts it actually on chain, right? So once Worldcoin is live, none of your images have to leave the Orb, right? And so this is a really, really cool system. Now, in terms of privacy, this means that no images will have to leave the Orb. We don't need your name. We don't need your contact info. We don't need your email. We don't need your phone number. We need to KYC you, right? But this was still not private enough for us. There was 2 problems here. The first one is that your iris hash would be connected to your wallet, right? And that's something we don't want. And the downside of this is that it would force you to only have one identity instead of many identities, including pseudonymous ones. And so we did a lot of thinking of how can we improve on top of this. And we ended up doing another layer using zero knowledge proofs, right? This is some really, really cool technology that many of you are probably familiar with, which basically what they allow us to do is allow you to disconnect your iris hash from your wallet. So no one, not even Worldcoin, will know which iris hash that is public on chain corresponds to each wallet. And so this is a very complicated system. You can read about it on our website. I won't get into it. But basically, once we had that, we said, okay, now let's go out to the world and test it. Right? And so about 6 months ago, or 9 months ago, I guess at this time, we started really, really testing intensely. We've been in about 25 countries, probably more at this time, all over the world, right? We had to test everything from temperatures for the orbs, right? Operating in really cold conditions and really hot conditions, in rich countries and in poor countries, with a lot of different languages and different local traditions to test the entire project, right? During this time, we've had almost 600,000 people sign up to the beta. And during the beta, it's important to highlight that the privacy guarantees are different because there's some things that we're still computing on server and whatnot, and we're very upfront about this to the participants. And so right now, where we're at today is we're still finishing this beta, right? Worldcoin, the token, is not live yet. We're still operating in all of these countries. And this is only with about 25 orbs on the field. Now, the really cool thing that we're doing right now is that we're about to get our first shipment of 250 orbs that come from a lab, from a factory instead of from a lab. And then the next month, we'll get another 250 and so on and so forth. So if with 25 orbs on the field, we've gotten to these numbers, it's pretty easy to imagine how quickly we can scale as we get more devices. And so all of this stuff, from the software to the hardware to the firmware and the protocol, we announced about a month ago that we're open sourcing, and we laid out a roadmap for each of these components. So I encourage you to check it out. Some parts of these are already open source, so you can start playing with. In addition to that, we've started opening up, did a bunch of things. We're building in public. Basically, we're also setting the path to decentralize. But throughout all of this, there is one question we kept getting from devs like you, which is, all of this is really cool, but how can I reuse this identification or this verification on my app, right? Because your global currency it's a cool experiment, but I have another idea of what I would do with this. And as we talked with many of you, we realized that yes, there's a lot of cool things that you can build when you solve sybil resistance, but we're not willing to compromise on privacy, right? When we have control over all of these things in the Worldcoin project, we're able to make these promises. But we were very concerned, to be honest, about opening up these to developers. And so we thought a lot of how to go about letting other people build on this verification without violating user privacy. And so some suggestions that people made is, well, just whitelist the wallets, right? Or issue unique IDs per user. And it turns out that all of these don't work for reasons that you can track users across apps, or you cannot support multiple identities, or you can match the biometrics from one user to the wallet. And so at the end of the day, we said, okay, if we're going to build an SDK, it has to be built on the same zero knowledge proofs that we use ourselves. And so with that, we built what we called World ID. And today you're getting a sneak peek of the alpha of that. And it's very simple. It's a protocol that allows you to anonymously verify that someone is real and that they haven't performed some action before, right? So just as today, we use this protocol to say, hey, I'm a real person and I have never claimed Worldcoin before. Now with this SDK, you can have any other action, right? And so people can say, hey, I'm a real person and I have never minted this NFT before, or I'm a real person and I've never joined this Discord before. All of these actions that users can perform are not connected to each other unless they use the same wallet, right? But when it comes to World ID, there's nothing that links them together. And so I can, for example, with one identity, participate in the governance of Uniswap, and with another identity, mint an NFT, and the world doesn't know that both of those people is me. The world only knows that me as a human behind all of these identities only performed each of these actions once, right? And so all of this is actually a pretty complex system that you can read about more in our talks, but we wanted to make it super easy to use, both for devs and for users. And so for devs, what we did is we built a super simple widget that you can implement with 3 lines of code to your projects. And for users, we created this abstraction that is sort of like a CAPTCHA, right? But instead of proving that you are not a robot, you're proving that you are a human that has never done something before. And so this is a super simple CAPTCHA widget. This is a super simple widget. Right now it's on JavaScript, which you can integrate. And so what it looks like is, let's imagine you're a project called Mesha, right? That you want to execute an airdrop. So typically your website would look something like this, right? Where users can connect their wallet and just claim it. But then if they connect many wallets, they can just claim it many times. So what you can do with World ID is you can now embed this World ID widget. Yes, sec here. And it's very similar to a CAPTCHA, right? The button is locked and you have to complete the challenge for World ID. So when you check on the checkbox, it brings up a QR code. Behind the scenes, this works with Wallet Connect, which you scan using the Worldcoin app where your identification lives. You approve it from the app that is reflected on the website, and then the claim button is enabled, right? This means that in this example, I could have connected any wallet that I wanted to receive the tokens, but I will only be able to execute this with one wallet. Okay, if I try to do this again, even if I connect a different wallet, this CAPTCHA will fail. Okay. Now we actually went ahead and built this example, and you can play with it. So if you go to worldcoin.org/hackmoney, you can actually find the dApp, the source code, the smart contracts for this specific example, so that you can get a better idea of how to go about implementing this. This is exactly the flow that we just talked about, right? For users, basically, first they need to go to an orb, which issues them World ID, and they store it on their phone on the Worldcoin app. Then you as a developer can integrate the World ID widget. And then when users want to use it, they can scan that and approve it from their phones. Their phones generates the zero knowledge proofs on device that allows them to use this. And then you as a developer get notified from this, and you can execute whatever action you want to do, right? And so this is super flexible, right? We envision this being used for things like voting, right? For DAOs or for airdrops. Airdrops we think are a really, really big deal, whether it's NFTs or protocols decentralizing or education. For things like quadratic voting, right? And quadratic funding, doing person-bound NFTs, account creation, and even probably Web2 use cases. This does not replace KYC in every case, because sometimes you need KYC for compliance. But in the case where you're trying to do it for fraud prevention, it's actually pretty effective. And so all of this is available today with a really, really cool set of additional tools to make your life easier on Polygon. And we will be deploying on additional networks soon. And so you get a couple of things. You get the underlying network. There is a JavaScript widget that basically is an abstraction on top of that protocol. We have a really complete set of docs and guides for this alpha for you to play with. And we've even done a simulator for the app and for the orb, right? We know that orbs and the app itself is not available yet in every country. And so you can actually play with a simulator that I'll show you in a second. And then lastly, we put together one example, and over the next weeks and months, we'll be releasing additional example projects of how you can implement World ID. So all of this is made possible by 3 open source projects mainly, Semaphore, Hubble, and Wallet Connect. So we want to give them a huge shout out, and we are contributing to all of those projects, and we hope you do too. And we have big plans for World ID as it comes, right? We'll very soon have deep linking support so that mobile apps can just move between our app and that app, other chains, and a bunch of other really cool things. In terms of the timeline, right now you're getting a sneak peek at the very, very first alpha. We literally just put this together. So we're keeping this a little bit low key. It's not secret. It's on our Discord, but we're not really advertising it. It only works with the mock app, with the app simulator that I showed you, and it only works on Polygon. Over the next month or two, we will actually do a formal announcement. It will actually be implemented into the real Worldcoin app, so that you can access all of the real users that have already verified an orb. And we'll keep iterating all of this with all of the feedback that you give us. And then sometime later this summer, we'll actually open up this for all developers. It'll be on multiple chains, and we will be in the scaling phase when it comes to verifying users with the orbs. Now, if you're interested in building on this, we're super happy to obviously talk through the Discord, but also just to schedule a one-on-one call with you so that we can get your feedback and you can ask questions. So you can find us in the Discord channel on sponsor-Worldcoin on the official Discord, or on our own in discord.gg/Worldcoin. So in summary, before opening up for questions, World ID is a protocol to solve sybil resistance at scale in a private way. It is self-custodial and open source, and it is super easy to use and to implement. We have about over $16,000 in prizes for teams that decide to hack on this and give us feedback during the hackathon. Some of these are specific prizes, and there's even a pool that will get distributed amongst any project that gets built. And also, any project that builds during this hackathon will also be fast-tracked in the community grants if they choose to keep building on this that we're about to announce in a couple of weeks. All right, so that's pretty much it. We hope you hack on this, and if you really, really like it, consider joining the team. We're hiring across the board. And so with that, I will open it up to our questions. All right, let me see here in chat. So how can I get my World ID? Where are these orbs? So right now the orbs are available. During the beta, we have very few orbs right now, and so we move them around countries depending on what we need to test. If you go on the App Store on Google Play and look for Worldcoin, If you see the Worldcoin app there, that is good news, because it means that at some point we have operated in your country, so you can download that. And then within the Worldcoin app, you can actually find a map where all of the orbs that are available show up. If you do not see the Worldcoin app there, then that means we have never been in your country yet, and that we will be there soon. As we get a lot more orbs over the next months, we will go even to more countries, and so keep posted on our social networks. Let's see, are you going to sell the hardware orbs, or will they be specific? Okay, no, so we will not sell the orbs, because as a user, you only need to go to the orb once, right? As a user, you go to the orb, you show a QR code that on the Worldcoin app to the orb, then you get verified by the orb. And so then basically your app becomes verified, okay? And so the orbs it's basically like a gig economy model, similar to Uber or Airbnb, where there's people around the world that go with the orbs. They earn a small amount of Worldcoin for every person they verify. And so they move fluidly in neighborhoods. And we also expect that at some point there will be stationary orbs in different cities around the world, right? If you're interested in applying to become one of these people, you can do so on the website on worldcoin.org. There is a section where you can apply to operate orbs around the world. Where is the hash of the iris stored? So at launch, the end state is that it will be stored on chain, right? And anyone will be able to see it. So we don't have any special privilege over this. As we talk about in a couple of blog posts on the website, during the beta, we're still building to that, right? And so today, we still store that on our servers, on our encrypted servers, and we make that very clear when you sign up. And when you sign up today, we also give you the option of backing up the images themselves also on our servers. The reason people choose to do this is because we're still updating the algorithm which we use to generate that iris code, right? And so what happens is if you don't back up your images, basically your verification gets expired and you need to return to an orb. And so some users would rather do that and have us not store their images. And so that is a choice that they have. But if you trust us, you can, during the beta, you can back up your images, which means that we can just recompute the iris hash on those same images and basically keep your verification active instead of expiring it. All right. If you have multiple phones and generate multiple identities, how does Worldcoin validate as a person? I'm registering once. So basically, the orb will only allow you to sign up once, right? And so supporting multiple identities is a level above World ID. Basically, you can have many wallets and use whichever wallet you want, but behind the scenes, you can only have one World ID. Now, if you lose that, we will eventually have a flow where you can go to an orb and basically revoke your old World ID and get a fresh one issued, right? So this is important not just for account recovery, but also to de-incentivize people from buying and selling these, right? If I sell you my World ID, but then I can go to an orb and just steal it back, then it makes it a lot less likely for you to buy it, okay? So we will eventually support that. So after initial orb verification, my device phone becomes an ID verification station for users. Yes, and now this key, basically that verification is like a second private key, right? Just as you have a private key for your wallets, you have a private key for your World ID. So that private key you can back up to iCloud or Google Drive. We might eventually let you export it. We don't do that because we don't want people buying and selling World IDs. And so right now you can back it up to iCloud or Google Drive. And so if you download the app on another device where you have the same iCloud or Google Drive account, you can restore that and just use it across the board, right? Now, obviously, you will only be able to use it once. So if you use it on your iPad once, you cannot use it again on your iPhone. Let's see. Can you explain CKPs a little bit more? For sure. So basically, there is, actually, this is a good segue for me to show you this. So if you go to worldcoin.org/hackmoney, you'll get on this Notion. We're going to find a lot of resources, the guidelines for the hackathon, the prices, resources for hacking directly on World ID, including some ideas. And here in background reading, you can actually read Introducing Semaphore, Semaphore White Paper, or Advances in Zero Knowledge Proofs will be a great primer to learn more about CKPs. Oops, let me share your screen here again. Some of the other things that you can find here is a link to the documentation, which I was mentioning, right? It's a pretty complex, not complex, complete set of guides and examples of how to use a JavaScript widget and things like that for you to hack with World ID. And you also get the link to the app and orb simulator, right? So basically this allows you to simulate that you have an orb and that you have an app, and it allows you to play with this as a developer so that you can build applications on top of World ID. Okay. Let me look at the chat here. If UBI is implemented, will it be withdrawable to different wallet addresses if the original address is compromised? Yes, because World ID is not connected to your wallet, right? So it depends on the implementation of whoever is doing the UBI. But basically, what you could do is you could say, okay, every month there is basically a new tranche of UBI, right? And every month you need to verify with World ID that you haven't claimed that month's UBI. And so every month you get to choose which wallet you connect, right? And so even if you lose the wallet that you've used in previous months, as long as you still have access to World ID or you have gone to an orb to recover it, then you can just connect a new wallet and then keep claiming your UBI with that, all right? And I don't know how we're doing with time. I know there's still a couple of questions. Should we keep answering them here? Should we send them to Discord? How should we go about this?
Yeah, we can go for another 2-3 minutes if you want to answer as many as you can, and then maybe go to Discord afterwards.
Sounds great. All right. So what do we expect hackers to implement on top of World ID? All right. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of problems that that you can solve with sybil resistance, right? It's not about what we expect. It's about what you think you can build. We have some ideas of what you can do with that, right? We envision, for example, doing DAO governance, right? Where each person can only vote once, or airdrops where maybe you create a PFP NFT where each human can only claim one, but they can claim it for free, right? Or something like retroactive airdrops, like what Optimism just did. Maybe there's a world where having sybil resistance is very useful for that, right? Also projects like Gitcoin, right? They rely on sybil resistance, and currently they use a lot of factors to make sure that the quadratic votes are fair, right? And so there's some ideas in this slide. If you want to take a screenshot, we have more ideas on the Notion on worldcoin.org/hackmoney. But it's really whatever you can think of. All right, and let's take one last one. Could you keep your Worldcoin private key on a hardware wallet? That's a good question. So that is not supported today. But it might be something interesting to explore, whether World IDs should or could be stored on a hardware wallet instead of a regular wallet. As of today, the World ID can only be stored on the official Worldcoin app. The reason for this is that we actually also rely on some fraud prevention mechanisms directly in the app, right? And so right now, we haven't had the bandwidth, frankly, to figure out how to have those same fraud prevention guarantees in third-party clients for issuing World ID. And so for now, that can only live on the Worldcoin app, but it's a very interesting question to think about how to do it somewhere else. All right, and let's do one last one. So if vote on DAO, for example, signing my wallet verified with World ID as well, and then I will try to do the same action with another wallet, it will be restricted to one vote. Yes, exactly. So if you vote, let's say that there's the compound governance, right? And you get to vote. Basically, Compound could do a one-person, one-vote system where each person connects a wallet, they vote, and to vote, they have to verify with World ID that they have never voted before. And so if they try to vote again with a different wallet, then they will not be able to do so. All right. All right, cool. I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, hit us up on Discord. Again, either in the official channel or in the Worldcoin Discord, and we'll be happy to chat with you there directly or schedule a one-on-one Zoom call.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiago. Tiago, that was super, super informative. Got a lot of really interesting questions. So super glad that you're able to answer them. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this workshop for Hack Money. And for the rest of you, thank you so much for joining. As Tiago said, The Worldcoin team is available on Discord, both on their own Discord as well as in the sponsor Worldcoin channel on the ETH Global Discord. So definitely hit them up if you have any questions. And with that being said, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, evening, or morning.
It's good. Have fun hacking.